Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Hislop, the Executive Director from the Montana World Affairs Council. Welcome to another session of Connect Montana, where we bring the world to Montana and Montana to the world. It's been an amazing week here at All Ireland Week from Connect Montana, where we have been speaking with a range of people in Ireland talking about the rich cultural, historic, economic, political connections between Montana and Ireland. And today that will continue. We're very happy to have with us our good friend Brigitte Miranda-Freer from the Montana World Trade Center. And joining us all the way from Dublin, Ireland is Elaine Coughlan. Elaine is a founder and managing partner of Atlantic Bridge, a global technology growth equity fund. Prior to this, she was a founder of Glonav, acquired by NXP, and CFO for 3 successful Irish technology Nasdaq IPOs, Parthus, Iona and Smartforce. Elaine has been named as one of Europe's top 50 inspiring women in technology and is also a board member of Enterprise Ireland. Elaine holds a master's in corporate governance and is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. And yesterday's guest, John Reynolds, called her the smartest person in Ireland. So Elaine, over to you. You've got to unmute your microphone, Elaine.
I just muted it, sorry, apologies. I was too keen. Thanks so much, Chris, for that great introduction. And to the Montana World Affairs, you guys have done a great job all week, had fantastic speakers. I was able to listen to most, and I was able to go back on YouTube and on the ones that I missed. So thanks for organising this event. And look, it's very hard for me to follow all the great speakers you had on great topics. Dr. Jenny on healthcare and COVID, Robert O'Driscoll, our Counsel General on Ireland's place in the world, and Jonathan Westrup on Ireland's economic miracle, and Gary German on Yates, and John Reynolds on Christy Moore. So look, they're all legends. So it seems I have the graveyard shift here at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday in Ireland talking about cross-border flows, but I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible. And actually, I'm just going to share a few slides with you, which, just to give the backdrop, not to do a pitch on Atlantic Bridge, but just to explain my thinking later on in the discussion. So Atlantic Bridge, we are a global technology fund, and we're about 15 years old, and the team and offices are across the world. Our headquarters are in Dublin, but we've offices in London, Germany, France, the US, Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, and Beijing. And we've invested in over 60, probably 70 companies at this stage that employ 3,500 employees. And because we're investing across the globe in Europe, the US, and China, you know, we see a lot of fast growth tech companies. We're very much focused on cross-border. We really believe in, I suppose, global trade and the value add that can come to companies and societies from that. And it helps companies to grow really fast. And obviously it helps in terms of what they ultimately exit for. And, you know, some of the areas we're investing in are investments that are highly relevant now through and beyond COVID, like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, big data, and software. And I guess if we think about the major technology disruptions over the last 40, 50 years, every 8 to 10 years, there's really big shifts in the investment cycle. And way back in the 70s, it was all about the core silicon, the chips that are in your cell phone, semiconductors. And then in the 80s, it moved on to PCs in the workplace. And in the 90s, networking, driven really by Cisco, and laptops. And then in the noughties, moving into internet, enabling, you know, online commerce. 2010, obviously, beyond their big data, software as a service, companies like Facebook emerging, drone companies emerging, the sharing economy emerging. And now we believe we're in the middle of another shift. From about 2018 onwards, we've been talking about deep technology, and it's the area that we invest in. And the leaders, where they are and who they are, that's not yet established, but in key fundamental technologies like robotics and cybersecurity and AI. And of course, I would say now that with 2020 now and COVID, it's been turned turned on its head, and we are going to see a fundamental step change in the adoption of technologies, what technologies drive recovery and growth and help us find a solution to the desperate pandemic we find ourselves in the middle of. I think from an encouraging point of view, if we look over the last couple of years, the amount of investment that has gone into spaces like biotech, which are now going to be vital to us finding solutions like vaccines, artificial intelligence, which again is going to be vital for the efficiencies that we need to work remotely, but also into areas like advanced materials and drones and robotics. All of these investments are really from a standing start of probably zero 5-8 years ago, and now you can see, you know, billions being invested, 20 billion plus being invested in a few years in biotech. And then in terms of cross-border and our portfolio, we would have investments across Europe, the US and China, as I said. And in all of these cases, you can see the benefit from having US investors who bring along US customers, which then ultimately ends up with, you know, big companies buying, big US companies buying our European portfolio, and sometimes our European companies buying American companies. And you can see the types of acquirers that are really active, the likes of Apple, Dell, Intel, Bloomberg, getting access to technology and teams around the world. Okay, so hopefully you can see me there. Is that okay? Stop share. Okay, so why does any of this matter? So, well, you might be a little bit surprised that as a venture capitalist, where it actually start with is a not-for-profit that's called Endeavor. And Endeavor actually is an emission-driven US not-for-profit organization that was founded. And they believe that job creation, innovation, and prosperity flourish wherever there's robust support for high-impact entrepreneurs. And actually, in 2019, it was brought to Ireland for the first time by the Edge of U2, one of Ireland's most successful and famous Irish exports. And I was very honoured to be asked to join their board in Ireland. And, you know, what we believe, I guess, is that the global network of entrepreneurs to entrepreneurs help in scaling their companies, sharing of knowledge, sharing of networks, and that's fundamental to economic growth and to the development of high impact jobs. And it's very interesting for you folks in Montana that Ireland recently joined Endeavor, and the sister cities that joined with us are cities not too far from you in the Midwest: Denver, Colorado, New Arkansas, Louisville, and Pittsburgh. So look, I'd love to see at some point Missoula, Minnesota also looking at this initiative, because within Endeavor, the companies, there's about 1,600 entrepreneurs. They've created 3 million jobs in their companies, and they have 20 billion in revenues and about 1.6 billion in equity raised for their companies. So we're really excited to have Endeavor in Ireland to further drive international collaboration. Endeavor is actually very close to our hearts in Atlantic Bridge, because in Atlantic Bridge, we fundamentally believe that cross-border investment is great for people, for society, not just for investors, for jobs and for governments. Now, Robert told us on Monday that Ireland is the 9th largest investor in the US, and it made me think about what the US has invested in Ireland. And the US has invested 250 billion approximately in Ireland. And the perception might be that that's about tax, but really in recent years, all the US corporates that we bring to Ireland or that come via the IDA to us, they ask me questions like, what's your talent like? What's your universities? What's your VC ecosystem? So it's not about tax. No country really has a monopoly on where and how innovation happens. You just have to be around the hoop of it. So when I think of Montana, I think of the beautiful, great state that you have. And actually, I think about Seamus Heaney, one of our other very famous poets, who, along with Yeats, might have wrote his famous Bogland poem while thinking about Montana. He said, "We have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening. Everywhere the eye concedes to encroaching horizon. Now, whilst that's true about Ireland, it's a small place with limited horizons. We don't have your beautiful sunsets and beautiful prairies, but we have great frontier spirit here, like you guys. And we're always pushing boundaries and borders, as you well know, because there's 44 million descendants apparently of us in America today. But today, when we look at Ireland's VC industry, it's running at about 800 to $1 billion a year investment. And the economic studies that we've done independently have proven that VC-backed companies, they grow faster, they scale, they export more, they create more jobs, and they also have much higher intensity investment in R&D. And even just since 2016, our investments with our partners have created over 5,000 jobs directly in Ireland. So today we have about 20 VC funds in Ireland that are indigenous, and we have about a further 10 international firms, mainly US, that have come to Ireland. And that's up from just a small handful about 20 years ago. So, you know, in preparing for today, I took a look at Montana and what's happening there. And you actually have a great VC organization with a brilliant name called Rocky Mountain VC. I mean, where would you get it? And Rocky Mountain, the companies associated with that organization have raised about 350 million into Midwestern companies. And that got me thinking about Ireland. We're obviously about 3x roughly what you're investing locally in your region. And I thought about, you know, the capital pool that you have within a 2-hour flight of Bozeman to San Francisco. You know, you have 160 billion capital pool, the largest capital pool in the world in Silicon Valley. Some of the brightest minds in the world, some of the best scientists, some of the best technology companies. And, you know, I looked at it first of all and I said, well, I could look at this negatively. They're getting, you know, 0.00000, and I gave up then whatever percent of that pool. Or if Montana is able to tap in over time and even attain 1% of that pool, you have a 1.3 billion annual investment pool of capital available to you. And it's encouraging to hear that you have 5 to 6 VC firms now in Missoula. And some of them are homegrown, and you have a strong set of universities, a low cost of living, beautiful, obviously, quality of living. And I actually think now with remote working now and the massive change that has happened with COVID, which I'll talk about a little bit later, I think Montana has a huge opportunity to really build a strong innovation ecosystem. Because I don't think there's a person on the planet that doesn't believe that an increasing proportion of our country's wealth and our well-being and our economies and our GDP is going to come from innovation. And it's going to have your economy access to key enabling technologies like artificial intelligence. Even though there is some disquiet about AI, I'll be able to share with you later examples of cases where AI has had a huge net positive impact. So finally on to COVID. Firstly, you know, we're thinking as investors very deeply, carefully, patiently and thoughtfully about COVID, because we believe this pandemic is having a really profound impact and effect on the way that we live, the way that we work, the behavioral changes, the patterns of investment. Obviously, from an economic point of view, the devastation that it's causing to all our economies and to jobs, and that we have to pull out of this, and that we have to pull our economies out of this, and that we're going to have to overcome massive economic challenges. And some of those challenges will be overcome by way of adopting new technologies. So we're thinking in Atlantic Bridge about some of the big themes and what's resilient during and post this dreadful pandemic. And I was thinking before coming on today's call that bad and all as we are now today, the situation we are in with COVID, both in the US and in Europe and around the world, it would be a whole lot worse without technology and with the technology advances that have been made even in the recent few years. So for instance, today we're all having a virtual conference on Zoom, which just wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago. We are able to communicate, and we're all seamlessly working from home. home. Your cell phone is probably beside you. It's become a vital, essential piece of equipment. Not that it never was, but even more so now. And it will be vital probably when we get to the unlocking phase of COVID in terms of tracking and tracing and knowing who is clear and who isn't, and who's at risk and who's not. We have 4G and 5G infrastructure and high-speed Wi-Fi. So there will continue to be massive investment in essential infrastructure to give us the capacity and the headroom and the bandwidth. We've streaming platforms that enable the likes of Netflix so that we can watch things like Tiger King. And we have remote and virtual technologies that are going to continue to remain hugely in demand. We actually recently invested in a French company that enables project management teams around the world for companies like Boeing and industrial manufacturing companies to work together in virtual data rooms or conference rooms on their projects, on complex manufacturing and industrial projects. So, you know, we're also asking ourselves the question, do we all need to be in cities all of the time? We're seeing how remote working is working extremely well. We're reducing congestion in our cities and the wasted time that's spent in traffic. We're asking ourselves the question, how much commercial real estate do we need? Do we all need the level of investment? Will that be impacted? As I say, remote working is very successful. There's no reason why my employees can't work from Missoula, Minnesota, or West Cork down in Ireland. They're doing that very successfully today. So there's been really super trust between employers and employees in organizations maybe that didn't traditionally allow home working. On the negative impact, obviously we're thinking about travel and airlines and hotel sector as a sector that will probably shrink and will have a tough time and will struggle to recover. We're also thinking about the dependency on supply chains. I believe we're going to see way more repatriation of supply chain to in-market. So that's going to build redundancies. We'll all have supply chains, whereas at the moment they're very efficient, but they're obviously located in jurisdictions not necessarily close to us. And there's been a huge increase in cybercrime. So cyber technologies are going to be increasingly important. EdTech, and then obviously healthcare. We see massive investment in healthcare. You heard Dr. Jenny talking about how her practice has completely changed. Digital tech has arrived in a day. Biotech is going to be obviously key for vaccines, and AI in heart scanning. We've just invested in a US company that will enable anybody to do echoes and reduce bottlenecks in the system. So in summary, I have no doubt that the companies and the countries that embrace technology are going to have better outcomes, and that how quickly we adapt and change our work practices and access to technology will determine how quickly our economies can recover from this. So look, I'd like to thank you, wish you all the very best in these very tough times, and thanks for giving me your time today to listen to what I had to say. Thanks, Chris, over to you.
Elaine, thank you very much. We're going to go straight over to our friends at the Montana World Trade Center and Brigitte Miranda Freer. To you, Brigitte.
Hi there. Elaine, I can't decide if I'm ashamed to admit or feel some kind of connection afar to you to tell you that I too have seen Tiger Kings, for better or for worse. And I think
I'm only on episode 4.
America. I know, I speak for all of America when I say everyone thinks that woman killed her husband too. All right, now moving on. So I asked this question with a caveat that, you know, COVID-19 has rocked our world. So any predictions we make about the future really have to be taken with a rather large grain of salt. But that said, given your background in the Irish tech sector, I'd like to drill down a little bit on long-term opportunity for inbound Irish FDI into Montana. So maybe more specifically, you know, are there Irish technology firms that are on your radar that are looking for a foothold in the US? And if so, what do they see as critical factors in their decision-making process?
Well, look, I think that's a great question. I think, first of all, you know, when Robert said, you know, we're the 9th largest, and when I even just look at our own portfolio, our whole model is Irish companies crossing over the Atlantic, hence Atlantic Bridge, into the US. So we are big believers in the benefit of it's a very symbiotic relationship. There's been huge stresses on that relationship, and not least from a political point of view, but just from a cost point of view. The big cities like San Francisco, the Valley and the East Coast, the cost of living has just become stratospheric. And so it's becoming very difficult to hire and retain, even for American companies in the Valley. So we have seen a number of companies, including our own Irish companies, go to other states, whether that is Austin in Texas, which again is getting very toppy in terms of cost of living, but branching out into states in the Midwest, Utah, which would have a very strong software background. So I don't see any reason why Montana cannot do this, because you would offer. Key is talent. Have you the talent coming out of the universities? You certainly have a great cost of living. You also have, great lifestyle. So I think, there's a huge push now, and I think it's going to be accelerated with COVID, because we've realized now that everybody doesn't have to be sitting in Palo Alto, and with the kind of cost that brings. Now, I would say the other factor for Ireland to Montana will be to focus on areas where there's mutual strengths. So for me, things like ag tech, just given your background and some of the customers you've got in Montana, the really big agricultural suppliers and manufacturers and industrial. So I think that could be very interesting, where Irish companies, particularly in the ag tech sector, want to set up, but it doesn't make sense for them necessarily to set up in a high cost location on the coast, somewhere like Montana. So I would pick sectors where there's, where you have a relevance, where you have expertise, where you have core depth, where you're able to bring employees, talent, and also customers. And the third part of that, which, I have had conversations with Chris about, is also investors. And that's why you need to build an ecosystem the way Ireland has done. And as I said, we did it from zero. So it is possible to do it. And it obviously takes time as well. But look, you're well on your way, and you've got the great benefit of being 2 hours from San Francisco.
Elaine, I want to pick up quickly on the point of ecosystem, because Dr. Jonathan Westrup also mentioned that on Tuesday in our show. What he was talking about was something I think at the more micro level and more explicit, which is the ecosystem. Let's just use, for example, here in Missoula or in Bozeman, whereby you have a university representing a certain talent pool. You have the private sector and emerging tech sector in both cities. And then you have the community, both in terms of just the community writ large, but then the city administration and the city leadership. For venture capital, how important are those explicit links? How important is it for venture capitalists to know that those 3 areas are talking to each other, linking up, and providing the kinds of opportunities that you're looking for?
It's a great question. Really important is what I would say. And even in a small country like Ireland, and our populations are kind of broadly similar, Montana and Ireland. So we should be able to do this. We should be able to do it better than the really big, massive economies like, say, France or Germany, where you have very diverse populations across really massive areas of land. So it really does matter. And for instance, we have a university fund in Ireland, Atlantic Bridge, which is all about driving deeper, closer links between the academics that are developing this IP and the research, and helping them to commercialize that. And so the ingredients are great talent, but they have great tech, but they don't necessarily always have great commercial expertise. They don't have access to it. They don't have commercial knowledge, customers, and they don't have investors. So bringing those elements of your ecosystem together in Montana is key. And I think that's actually quite attractive if you're able to show to international investors that you have got those linkages built, that you have the forums, that you have the connectivity between universities. Collaboration is really key. And what we're seeing in technology is, we have now the concepts of med tech, ag tech, biotech. It's these core areas of the physical sciences with technology. So you really do need people from different areas of expertise to come together and work collaboratively. And that's really where you get 1 and 1 equals 11. And that's what we're trying to do in Ireland. And as I say, we're doing well. I think we can do it better. And I think smaller economies and smaller populations should be able to organize. But obviously it requires, you need to have a plan to know where you're going. So I think you need within Montana to focus on which sectors are we going to target? And because we're small players in Ireland, we also have to focus on niche areas that we can win in.
Elaine, I promised you a lot of very softball questions, but this really begs the more difficult and broader question. Venture capitalism, it requires a spirit of venture, but it requires capital. In a global market downturn, what can we expect for availability of capital? You have 1 minute.
So there's no doubt that at the moment there's a huge pullback. There was a pullback anyway, because we were probably at peak cycle. You need momentum, confidence for investors. So we're all waiting for the knife to fall and hit the ground. So I think you will see an abundance of caution. Once things begin to settle, investors and their ultimate backers, which are the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds and the insurance companies, will seek to deploy capital, because asset values are going to be on the floor around the world, and that with every crisis comes opportunity, and there will be opportunity to invest. Where that point is in the cycle, I would say to you, Chris, is too early. It really depends on how quickly we get to the unlocking phase of COVID, and whether and when we see secondary outbreaks, and how quickly economies and governments are able to track and trace and treat. So I would say it's still unknown, but a massive capital crunch and liquidity crunch at the moment. In fact, right now with all our portfolios, it's all about cash. Cash is king, cash runway, and just making sure that these great technology companies survive. There's no winners at the moment.
All right, a little bit of good, a little bit of bad there. Elaine, last word to you before we wrap up.
Well, I just would like to wish you all in the Montana World Affairs Council the best of luck. You're obviously a key stakeholder in trying to build out your ecosystem for trade. And, I think the open mindset of international trade, we were hoping to host you in Ireland. I know that didn't happen, but hopefully in better days, you guys will make it across to us, and we'll make it across to your big prairies, and to hope that you're all well and safe. And just to thank you for this initiative, and for all the great speakers. We learned a lot this week about Montana and about our own country as well. So wishing you well, and thanks very much.
Elaine Coughlan, everybody, thank you so much for that. Thank you for coming on. And thanks to all of the guests this week on All Ireland Week. A fantastic week. If you missed any of these shows, again, they are on the Montana World Affairs Council YouTube channel and on our Facebook feed. Check them out, please. Special thanks to the Montana World Trade Center, our friends there, in bringing a number of these shows to us. Brigitte Miranda Freer, thank you so much. Next week, we've got another great week. It's Asia Week. We are going to have the Consuls General of Japan and South Korea and a former government minister from New Zealand talking about connections between Montana and Asia, and also touching upon COVID-19 response. So please join us next Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday for Connect Montana. Those events will be sent out on our Facebook feed, so please check that out. Once again, thanks to all of our Irish friends and everybody for participating. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.